Hello and welcome to a special one-off, a darts debate. Now, I'll be mediating this. I'm just taking the Laura Woods role, except without any of the positive or good attributes that you associate with Laura. But the panel is where we have the quality. We have not only Rod Studd, a man with just the right words for every occasion, commentator for Sky Sports Darts, of course. We have Wayne Mardle, entertainer, participator, and two-time world champion in some meaningless Twitter poll nonsense with shirts and walk-ons.
Mardle.
Sorry, what was that, Wayne?
Mardle.
Okay, yeah, very well. And Stuart Pyke, another veteran of the commentary box in Sky Sports Darts. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. The question sounds very simple. It has been put to you, who are the 5 greatest darts players of all time? Now, it sounds simple, but there are many ways you can approach this. It is kind of vague in a way. We'll start with Stuart. Stuart, how have you approached this? Did you come to this with any criteria for when you're picking your 5 when you were given this all-encompassing question?
Well, I actually came up with 8 or 9 names and then had to eliminate, obviously, 3 or 4. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's 2 ways of looking at it. The greatest 5 of all time, or the best 5 that you've ever seen. So, you know, I had to eliminate the likes of John Parr and Dennis Priestley, Jockey Wilson. They all came close to making the cut. And of course, you've got to mention Martin Adams for his longevity and what he achieved in the BDO and winning at the Lakeside. But I eventually came up with 6. I'm still not too sure about which one to leave out. So I guess we'll all argue the case later and then come up with a definitive 5. But I think probably all our top 3 would be the same, but maybe in a different order, with Van Gerwen, Eric Bristow and Phil Taylor. And then the other 3 that I had in mind were John Lowe, Gary Anderson and Raymond van Barneveld. And for me, it's between those 3 for who's the one to leave out. And of course, I will be persuaded or dissuaded by my erstwhile colleagues as we go along. But 6 into 5 won't go, so I guess one of those we're going to have to lose at some stage.
Yeah, I mean, there are some vagaries in the question about who's the greatest, of course. I didn't think there was any sort of vagary around the number 5 in the list, and you've come up with 6, but never mind, I'm sure we can figure it out. Rod, look, how have you approached this? I mean, Pyke raises a significant question. Are we talking about the greatest players? Or are we talking about the most significant players in the sport?
Well, I couldn't quite understand Pyke's difference between the best players of all time and the best players he's ever seen, because he's so old. He's seen every player going right back to Robin Hood. So, but no, I mean, I think we've all done a similar thing to what Pyke was saying there. I mean, what I did was go through all the greatest names I could remember playing darts and wrote them all down. And then as Pyke was saying there, you start to whittle them off from the bottom. So, I mean, I had a list, I guess it's pretty similar to Stuart's actually. I had all the ones I put down in the frame: Taylor, Van Gerwen, Bristow, Lowe, Barneveld, Gary Anderson, Wilson, Priestley, Part, Adams, Mardle, and the latter was eliminated quickest.
It didn't even make my list.
Why not? And so I mean, as you alluded to at the start, Dan, I mean, anyone that's ever watched a dart throw won't have Taylor, Van Gerwen and Bristow as their top 3 in some order, but trying to find the other 2 was slightly more difficult. And I agree with Stuart. Martin Adams certainly needs to be in a conversation, because he's still playing now at 63, and you know, we've seen him on some of the live streaming events, still well capable of averaging 100 at 63, which is absolutely ridiculous, really. And then I whittled it down, and my 5 in the end were Barneveld, Lowe, Van Gerwen, Bristow and Taylor.
Okay, well, look, Rod's mentioned longevity there. Let's cut to a man whose career ended hugely prematurely. How much is longevity a factor in picking your greatest players? Are you literally, Wayne, going for the best players at their best?
Yeah, I'm probably looking at it slightly different to Rod and Stuart. I couldn't care less, really, what the guys have won. It's not about success for me, because they're all brilliant, so they're all successful anyway. The longevity, I suppose it plays a part, because what I don't want in my list is someone that's I don't know, like a David Duval-like kind of player in golf that come around for a year, maybe 18 months, 2 years, and then disappeared. You've got to have some longevity, but I've gone for what I think are the most talented players, and I've listed them in what I think is order of talent. That's what I've done. Longevity, of course, comes in. Everything else, composure under pressure, how they fared against each other, and my list, like the guys said, you could think of about 10, 15 names, but you just dismiss. Dennis Priestley and Martin Adams were right up there for me. They really were. John Lowe was there as well. Party, but I have gone for the players that have got a talent, an innate talent that other players in the world just haven't got. And you hear about the styles and everything else. Like Van Gerwen is so different stylistically to Phil Taylor. Phil's more robotic and more methodical to Michael. So that makes Phil less instinctive, less natural. I don't think it does. It makes him less instinctive to a point, but not less natural. If he was to be a robotic kind of player, he wouldn't come back to the wrong side of his face. He would have watched the greats do it and come back like everyone else to there. And obviously, I'm going to go down the route of the way they throw. And for me, the innate talent that they've all got means that I've got Van Barneveld in 5th spot, Gary Anderson in 4th, Eric Bristow 3rd, Phil Taylor 2nd, Michael Van Gerwen in top spot. And I've got there purely on ability alone. Purely on ability. I've not gone for the mind games. I've not gone for the strength of mind. Of course, that all comes into it. But ability-wise, Van Gerwen is the best that I've seen by quite a long way, by the way.
Wow, that's a big statement. All right, well, look, I'm going to try and get you all to come to some kind of broad agreement, which may be
This
hard.
is where I lean.
Yeah, that's very, very realistic possibility. We're going to try and come up with a top 5. We've got 5 players each, or in Pikey's case 6. Can we? Can like Joe said?
Seriously, just so difficult. I mean, when you go by what Wayne was saying, for me, Gary Anderson, one of the most naturally talented players of all time. Raymond van Barneveld, fantastic watch. We all talk about the silky smooth, the 5 world titles. John Lowe, all right, may not be a showstopper or a great entertainer, but the history of the 9 darter. And don't forget, the first man to win 3 world titles in 3 separate decades. That's how tough it is to which one you leave out. If I was going to leave one out, I would probably, and I hate admitting this, agree with Wayne and probably leave John Lowe out. And then for me, it's just a case of the top 3 stays the same, but in which order, and then whether Gary's 4 or Barney's 4.
Wayne, you're lifting your hands up exasperated at the idea of John Lowe winning 3 world titles in 3 separate decades. Surely that, if anything, is an indication of talent that is enduring, isn't it?
Right, now I'm going to say something that could get me into trouble here.
Excellent.
Again.
Look, I've got to say, the professional world of darts in the 70s consisted of about 20 players. It didn't consist of great players. You just had to be slightly better than the rest, but you didn't have to be that good. That has changed. I know you can only be as good as your era, like Bristow, the best in his era by a long way. Taylor, and now Van Gerwen. Look, I understand all that. You can only beat who's in front of you, but in the 70s, there wasn't a lot to beat. It was the same players playing in the same events, all winning the same events. So I'm not poo-pooing 70s darts. What I'm saying is...
Well, you are. Yeah.
All right. In my opinion, it wasn't very competitive.
Right. Look, listen, not for the first time. He's clearly talking nonsense because he's almost saying that the way somebody looks or the style of what it is actually a definition of who's the best. So it'd be like saying that, the best people would be the best with the people with the best shirts or the best walk-ons or something like that. I mean, that's patently absurd. I mean, who would have a world title decided on any of that kind of silly nonsense?
I haven't said that.
But he's also saying that we all know that human beings get better at whatever they're doing as the more they do it and the way that the body and the brain and the mind and techniques develop. And if you were to say now that the second best goal, say Jordan Spieth or Rory McIlroy is a better player than Jack Nicklaus, that would be patently absurd, wouldn't it? But what he's saying there is because someone can now average 110 and say John Lowe couldn't, that player who's now second best in the world, now say Rob Cross or Peter Wright, they're a better player of all time than John Lowe. Well, nobody's arguing that.
No.
Nobody would seriously argue that. But you're saying that because someone now can do things better than John Lowe could do in 1984, they're a better darts player than he ever was. Well, that's nonsense.
I didn't say that.
Well, you are saying that. You're saying Van Gerwen's better than Taylor because he can average more than Taylor.
Which makes him a better player.
It doesn't make him a better player because Taylor had to play back in an era where the things weren't as good and he didn't have the opportunity to play at more competitive level, more tournaments, etc. and so forth. If Taylor was 31 now, he'd be a different player.
Where does Taylor come into John Lowe? I don't get this.
All right, but you're saying you've already said you think Van Gerwen's better than Taylor.
But we was on about John Lowe.
Yeah, all right, and you're also saying these people are better than John Lowe, the people that are playing now.
No. What I said was the darts world in the 70s wasn't that competitive because there wasn't that many players.
Yes.
You could go to the North American Open and there would literally be 1,000 runners with 995 being American that just went for a jolly up. And the other 5 were Englishmen or
right.
one Scotsman being jockey trying to nick a couple of quid.
But John Lowe beat Eric Bristow and Jockey Wilson in 2 of his world title wins.
Correct.
Right.
The same people beating the same players.
So they were rubbish?
Who said they were rubbish?
Well, look, you just said they're not very competitive. Do you think Eric Bristow and Jockey... Hold on a minute. Just a minute. Michael Van Gerwen beat Peter Wright when he was the 16th best player in the world and beat Michael Smith in 2 of his finals. Are you saying that was more difficult than beating Eric Bristow in his pomp?
One sec.
Hang on.
Did John Lowe beat Bristow in the 70s?
He beat him in the 80s.
Oh, right. So that's not the 70s.
Well, John Lowe didn't just play... John Lowe didn't just play in the 70s, did he?
Well, let me just adjudicate. Let me just come in here. I kind of agree with both of you, but I think what Wayne is trying to say is that competitive darts in this era is much tougher than it was in the 70s and the 80s in terms of the quality of the opposition. And I have to agree with him on that. But I also agree with Rodder that you can't diss John Lowe, who's one of the all-time greats of the sport. But then, we've got a job to first of all get 5 and then get that 5 in order.
I can say what I like.
Yes, yes, you can. And Pikey is making quite a salient point in that you do have a job here to get 5 and get them in order.
Oh, right, sorry, yes.
Well, one of the things that you're mentioning there, it's the strength of the field in which you're competing. And one of the guys that all of you have named, Raymond van Barneveld, who is probably fighting it out for a potential spot in the top 5 just inside for all 3 of you, I would imagine. Now, does this not need a bit of myth busting here? Because some people would probably wrongly dismiss Barney's 5 worlds. Well, some of them were in the BDO, but before Barney moved over, the BDO and PDC were pretty comparable in terms of strength. It was only Phil Taylor that stood out, really, that made it different, wasn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Dan. For a long time, and Rod and I agree on this, for a long time, we thought that Richie Burnett was 1, 2 or 3 in the world. And I'm on about when Taylor and Priestley were in their pomp. That's how good Richie Burnett was. But he was kind of, not dismissed, but he's kind of forgotten about in all this. He was an unbelievably good dart player. And because Barney joined the PDC so late, 2006, it's kind of, he wouldn't have lived with Taylor. He come across and he did live with it. I agree. I think Barney's done a hell of a job in kind of reinventing himself as a world leader in darts in 2006-07, then going on to be world number 1, world champ. Remember, everyone was saying he's not as good as Phil. He can't live with Phil. You watch when he comes over, he won't win a world title. What is incredible is that he hasn't won a world title since 2007. For me, that was improbable.
Okay, so
I think it's fair to say Barney was an underachiever. However brilliant he was when he came over to the PDC, I think he should have won a lot more than he did. Yet he came up against Taylor in finals. I think he missed opportunities in other tournaments. But I agree with Wayne that he needed, after the Circus Tavern, which we all agree is the greatest game, he needed to win on the Ali Pali stage for me.
But you've got to bear in mind, Pikey, that the field is much more competitive now. So that's
the point I made, Rob. Absolutely.
Which enhances his achievement.
But for me, he still should have had the ability.
No, I think
to win
you're quite right. He disappointed, didn't he? He flattered a lot, didn't he? He had near misses. But we should also remember the epic winning the Grand Slam of Darts in 2012, and also the Premier League finals night when he beat Taylor and Van Gerwen in successive matches. And, that was, a heck of achievement, wasn't it, to do that on the same night? So, but you're quite right. He didn't win enough, did he? He didn't win enough titles. But that's why I've got him down as fifth, and you guys maybe don't see him in the actual top five.
Okay, well, let's do 5 and 4 together, because I think you're in agreement that we've got a top 3, and we'll deal with the order of that in a moment. But 5 and 4, we've probably got 3 or 4 players fighting out for those 2 places. Is Barney making it into the top 5? And if so, does he get to 5 or does he get to 4?
I'll start off. For me, Barney's 5, just edging out John Lowe, and Gary Anderson is 4.
Barney's 5 for me as well. And not that it matters, but in 6, I had Dennis Priestley.
Okay. So, Rod, are you happy to put in Barney at 5?
Yeah. I agree with Wayne. Dennis Priestley was just on the cusp of things, because you've got to remember in 1994, he was the best player and he sent Taylor packing at the Circus Tavern to some tune. Yes. As Dennis says himself, I created a monster by winning that game so easily in 1994, first PDC final at the Circus Tavern there. And I think we should mention our friend and colleague John Parton. I know Pikey mentioned it at the start there, but you've got to remember that win in the 2003 final at the Circus Tavern, in my opinion, the finest World Championship victory of them all, because Phil Taylor, remember, had won 8 consecutive World Championships and was simply unbeatable. It was impossible to beat Phil Taylor. There was no chance. And Party had been absolutely annihilated 7-0 in a final before against Taylor. And to beat him there at that final, I know Wayne, I think, shares that view, was really, one of the greatest wins of all time, wasn't it, that final? I know you look back on it fondly, don't you? You enjoy that one. So I think Party is definitely worth a mention. But yes, Barney in 5 for me.
Okay, number 4 then. I know Pikey's going Gary Anderson. Where do you guys stand on that? Because Gary's obviously a 2-time world champion, but we've got players like Adrian Lewis, who's a 2-time world champion, and a guy who has an immense natural talent. When you talk about talent, Wayne, even Michael Van Gerwen has admitted he thinks Adrian naturally is more talented than, whatever that phrase means, but it's something that's come out of MVG's mouth.
Yeah, I agree. When I was kind of collating the list, Adrian Lewis kept cropping up as one of the best talents. But involved in all this is, of course, it's look, what makes a great player is not just the talent. And I don't think, personally, Adrian Lewis has done it for long enough. Whilst it's not about longevity, it's other things. Gary Anderson has won Premier Leagues as well. This is why I've got him in 4. And I see the way that Gary plays Michael Van Gerwen. I see the way that Gary plays when Phil was competing. He really competed regularly against them. And you kind of had no inkling at all as to what the result was going to be. I just feel that Adrian Lewis was so inconsistent that inconsistency, it's here. I can't get rid of it. And I just think that he can be beaten by players that maybe Gary Anderson can't. And I think Gary Anderson's talent, as in just ability on a dartboard, is better than Adrian Lewis's, which is why Adrian Lewis, for me, just about made the top 12. Adrian Lewis is far superior talent-wise to, say, John Park. Yet I have John Park slightly higher. So I'm contradicting my own list. But you have to kind of list them somewhere. Adrian Lewis for me is the underachiever, hugely in darts, massive underachiever.
Okay, Rod, where do you stand?
Lewis is an interesting one. He beat Anderson in that final the first time he won the World Championship, when Anderson hadn't quite become the player that the guys are talking about there in terms of being a top 5 of all time. And then the next year he won what was regarded as a soft world title, didn't he? Really, with the wind and everything, and Andy Hamilton, and no disrespect to Andy, did fantastic get to a final. I think most people think that was a little bit of a soft world championship, if you will. And then around that 2012 time, he was certainly in the argument to be the second best player in the world, 12-13, with a literally laughable game against Phil Taylor. But it's funny because I didn't really consider. I love Adrian. I think he's a fantastic to watch, as Wayne said. I mean, he's absolutely magnificent. But I never really considered him to be a runner for the top 5. And Gary Anderson had that period, 2015 to 18. When he's won all those Triple Crown titles, 2 World Championships, match play, 2 Premier League titles. Obviously a great player. But for me, and I know the guys disagree, Anderson's period as that elite player is so short. Maybe 4 or 5 years. That's why I prefer Lowe over that period of, as you mentioned, Dan, right at the top, to win a world championship in 3 decades, that iconic 9-darter, the first 9-darter on TV. And that's why I prefer Lowe, but I'll be outvoted here by the Anderson brigade.
Well, is there, it's another question I asked earlier, but is there an argument for saying a player is great because he is significant? Raymond van Barneveld helped an entire country fall in love with the sport.
Yeah.
John Lowe helped establish this. Dennis Priestley, one of the guys who broke away, and him and Taylor were the standard bearers for the sport. Is that an argument, or is that just nonsense? You can have
he's one of the it's an iconic tungsten trinity, if you like, from that era, isn't it? Everyone talks about Eric Bristow, John Lowe, and Jockey Wilson. They're the big 3, and then those epic battles between them in World Championship finals and big World Championship matches. So John Lowe, for no question, whether you think he's one of the best 5 players in the world, is still one of the greatest standard bearers for the sport of darts, and still one of the most iconic names in the world of darts, regardless of the fact that we have to go right back to getting on for 30 years since he was in his pomp. Okay, so have we got 2 for Gary Anderson in number 4 and 1 for John Lowe? Is that my understanding here?
I think so. I mean, I listen, John Lowe for me, that's what I said at the start. I know it sounded very odd and you're all laughing. I really couldn't, for thinking for a long time, get 6 into 5. And I think what Rod says, I don't often agree with him, but I have to say on this I do. I think John Lowe, I think flag bearer is important in our sport. We just as a little aside, we go back to what Fallon Sherrick did at the World Championship. Flag bearer for our sport. Front pages, middle pages, back pages, radio station, TV all over the world. I think that's what John Lowe and Brissy and Jockey were back in the day. The one thing that tipped it for me is that a lot of people at the time, especially after Gary lost to Adrian Lewis, were saying, "Well, there you go. That he'll never do it. We've been saying it all along. He's a great player. He's a great talent. But when it really comes down to it, he can't do it." But the first world title for me, Rob Cross went on to repeat it, didn't he? But to be at their very best, which I think both players were at that stage, Michael van Gerwen in the semi-finals, and then Phil Taylor in that epic final, for me, that just tilts it ever so slightly in his favour.
Okay, so that means we've got Gary Anderson at number 4, Raymond van Barneveld at number 5, and John Lowe not in the top 5. That is a fact, people. We'll move on to the top 3. Now, I think we know who they're going to be, but it's the order. So I'm just going to let Rod kick this off, because we know it's going to be Taylor MVG and Eric Bristow, but how have you got them and why?
Well, look at him up there. He's going to get. He's Mardle's ready to come up on his long run. He's Michael van Gerwen long run.
Yeah, this is what we call. Right. This is what we call. I love the fact that you've made him go first.
This is
what we call pressure.
Pressure. Right, I've got them in this order: Phil Taylor, Eric Bristow, Michael Van Gerwen. Right, I cannot understand why there's even an argument about the number one, because there is no debate. A man who's won 16 World Championships, 16 match plays, 6 Premier Leagues, 2 9-darters in the same match, 11 9-dart legs, number one for decades, dominated the whole darting landscape for 20, 25 years. So, when you talk about icons of the sport and, people that are famous, darts players who are famous outside darts. Pyke made a great point there. For a brief moment over Christmas last year, Fallon Sherritt was the most famous darts player in the world. But Eric Bristow and Phil Taylor are the two figures that have dominated outside of darts. Everyone's heard of those two players, even if they don't follow darts. So Taylor for me is nailed on, and he was beating Van Gerwen even when Taylor was 56 years of age. I mean, let's have it right. He was 56, and and that win in the match play 2017 for me, not only just darts, is one of the most remarkable. It's like Jack Nicklaus winning the Masters in '86. I don't think it's been quite given the credit it deserved. He beat all the best players in the world, annihilating along the way at the age of 56 to win the match play. It's absolutely staggering. And I've got Bristow, who, for anyone of our age, is just one of the great sportsmen. Never mind darts players. We did those tribute programs to darts players. But Bristow, anyone of our age, you wanted to be Bristow. Everything about Bristow was magnificent. The way he played, the way he swaggered, the chat, the style, the panache. I mean, and everybody practiced throwing everyone tried to practice in the garage throwing like that. I mean, the man was just an icon. So, with his 5 world championships, 5 runner-up, a figure that transcended the world of darts. And Van Gerwen, obviously, a fantastic operator, but I wonder if we have a conversation in say 10 years time, whether the guys will be saying that, like they have about Barney, did Michael Van Gerwen underachieve? Because it's my belief that you judge great players on winning great titles, big titles, and Van Gerwen still only has 3 world titles. And if he wins one every other year for the rest of his life, it will take him to 2046 to equal Phil Taylor. 2046. So to put him above Taylor, I think, is just silly play, Wayne.
Okay. Wayne, you can wait, because we're going to go to Pikey now, and you can stew on that. Stuart, your thoughts while Wayne tries not to implode.
Well, I agree with Rod on Taylor. I don't agree on 2 and 3. I would have them the other way round. Let me explain. I go back to the fact that before that for me, the current era, certainly the last 7, 8, 9 years, is the most competitive, toughest, hardest, dog-eat-dog, talented era that this sport has ever known. And who's to say that it's not going to get even better over the next decade, which is why I rate Michael Van Gerwen very highly. For me, the best ever, as it stands, as we talk today, Phil Taylor. The best I'd ever seen, without a shadow of a doubt, Michael Van Gerwen, which is why, for me, Taylor's 1, Van Gerwen's 2, and Eric's 3. I concur with everything Rod said about Eric. He became, obviously Wayne has known him for a lot longer, but for Rod and I, he became a very close and good friend. And we all know what Brissy was like. Brissy, up until the day he died, was the same Brissy that played darts. One day he'd shake your hand and then he'd have a huge argument with you because he disagreed with one thing you say. But that's what we loved about Eric. Literally, Eric, to coin the advert, was what it said on the tin. But I have Taylor just 1, Van Gerwen a definite 2, and Eric at 3.
Okay, well, speaking of huge arguments, Wayne Mardle, come and join the party.
I agree with the guys completely. No. Imagine that. Look, Eric in 3rd by a long way from 4. The joie de vivre, the charisma that he had on stage, no one's matched him since. We've had the showmanship with Bobby George and others have tried and failed. I believe that, look, it's an entertainment business, and Eric not only entertained away from the oche, and just the things he said immediately after winning his first world title. Doing the interview, he at 21 years of age, he says Bobby George is going to make a great number 2 of the future. Now, that's just clarity of mind. Well, we can only imagine what would have happened to me. I'd have sunk to my knees and drowned in a pool of my own tears. But he had it. Everything that you needed to be a top sportsman, he had it. He had that self-belief. He had that charisma that I've already spoken about. He had this ability to... And I was going to big events like the World Championships and the World Masters especially, every year from the age of like 12 years of age. I'd walk into the Rainbow Suite in Kensington for the World Masters, looking at all these darting icons like Bobby George, Eric Bristow, Stephen Lord and Paul Lim and Nicky Verashko.
Ronnie Sharp.
Yeah, yes, indeed, yeah. And I saw all these players when I was not even a teenager, younger than that. And I used to then feel in awe of Eric Bristow, thinking, why are the others here? They can't win. And you come back the following day to watch the finals, and there was Eric in the finals, standing there, giving it some of that, just throwing the darts like he did. And you're thinking, he's too good for you. And he knew he was too good for them. He knew. And everything about Eric was just different to the rest. It was like better than the rest. He seemed to, a bit like Tiger Woods for me, he seemed to look better doing what he was doing. If you was to put Eric in a row of 16 dart players and just say to someone, right, don't look at the board, who's the best player? You would look at Eric thinking, yeah, you're better than them, aren't you? You know you are. And that's the way I always saw Eric. And Phil was completely different to that. And Phil's my number 2. And the reason Phil's number 2, now, it's only my opinion. It's so hard to knock him off top spot because of what he's achieved. And Rod's right, and Stuart's right. He has won more world titles than the others combined. Than Phil, than Michael and Gary and Eric and Raymond. They've won 15 between them. Phil's won 16 world titles. No one will ever match what he's won because it's a ridiculous amount. But I never thought I'd see anyone in my lifetime to actually compete with Phil on an ability basis. I never thought we would see someone match the numbers. And I'm on about the numbers on a dartboard. I'm on about statistics. I'm on about averages. I'm not on about wins. Van Gerwen is the closest, if not, he's gone above what Taylor ever achieved for me.
Okay, I mean, just for example, like seeing Van Gerwen win the 2017 World Championship, in my limited time covering darts, that's the best World Championship campaign I've seen. He broke the world record in a World Championship twice. There were 2 highest losing World Championship records checked against him. He averaged more than 106 by the end of the tournament. Absolutely stunning. But he's never gone to a tournament, even at a shorter, truncated tournament, and played the way that Phil did at, say, the European Championship 2009, where he averaged 111 for an entire tournament and hit 37 180s in less than 60 legs of darts. I mean, just mental, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, this is where it gets difficult being in the Van Gerwen camp. Rod uses this a lot. It may be a recency bias. I may be just remembering the fact that I believe that the way I see Michael play is sexy. Not that he's sexy. Come on now. The way he plays, he's got this swagger. Phil is more methodical, so it can be less. It can be less on the eye. You can sometimes think this is a bit boring with Phil, as he's averaging 118.66. Michael averages 104, and you think it's magnificent. So there is that going on, of course there is. But I look at the stats, and I just think that some of the times Michael has played, no one on the planet could have coped with him. But I'm going to contradict myself once more, right? Over 1,000 legs, would I back Van Gerwen or Taylor? I would back Taylor all day long. He is more reliable than Van Gerwen, he's more consistent than Van Gerwen, but are Phil Taylor's on spells as good as Van Gerwen? The answer for me is no, which is why I make Van Gerwen the best player I've ever seen.
Okay.
Right. I think you've got a good point. That 2017 World Championship, you know, just before you mentioned it, that was what I was looking at, Dan. And I remember Wayne and I commentating, saying he's redefining everything you thought was possible about darts. And it was like Tungsten Terminator Mark II, because as you said, he averaged 114 in that unbelievable semi-final against Van Barneveld. I think the tournament average was 106 and 108 in the final against Anderson. But let's not forget that Taylor averaged 110 in a final against Raymond Van Barneveld, where he annihilated Barneveld in 2009, wasn't it? And Barneveld was a broken man. And that, when Barneveld was, you know, the second best player in the world, and Barneveld was a broken man, and he stood on stage saying, I practice 10 hours a day and still I can't beat this man. It's impossible. I'm finished. And he just absolutely dismantled a bloke and left him a broken man on a dart stage, which, by the way, I hate to mention it, he did to Van Gerwen as well, later on in the career at the World Match Play. And I think we should remember that even when Van Gerwen is, without question, the best player in the world from, say, 2013 onwards, I'd got it that Taylor beat him 13 times on TV after that, when Taylor was in his 50s. I mean, that's what you've got to remember here. And, you know, beating him in match play finals and at the match play, getting to the World Championship final at 57 years of age, when he lost to Rob Cross. And, I mean, Cross played brilliantly, didn't he? But, I mean, Taylor almost missed double 12 for 9 darts in that final. Still averaged over 100, even though he got beaten heavily. So, the period, I mean, Van Gerwen, that 2017, unquestionably, Dan, as you're quite right to say, the best World Championship performance ever, beating great players in the most scintillating fashion and most incredible level of performance. And if he carried on doing that in 18, 19, and now into 2020, then I think we'd be siding with Wayne. But he hasn't done that. Can he get back to doing that again? If he does, it'll be enjoyable to watch, won't it? Unless you're a darts player.
Okay, so we have number 5, Barney. Number 4, Gary Anderson. Number 3, Eric Bristow. And it is up in the air between MVG and Phil Taylor.
Well, no, I've been outvoted, Dan. I don't mind.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it to... I realise that leaving it to Wayne and to Rod will inevitably descend to virtual blows from across the country. So I'm going to bring in the voice of reason, which is saying something for Matt.
Seriously?
But Pikey, what do you can have the final word on this?
Okay, well,
Taylor or MVG?
I go back to what I said. Taylor the best ever, Van Gerwen the best I've ever seen. But I think Rod's argument is very persuasive, and it's good. It's actually good to see that he's put some effort into his research, come up with some decent stats for once. But you can't actually argue with what he says. You know, what Wayne says about Van Gerwen is absolutely spot on. And I think if you know, God willing and touch wood, we're all around to be able to do this in 5, 6, 7 or 8 years' time, I think that Taylor and Van Gerwen may well be the other way round. But as we're doing it now, Taylor 1, Van Gerwen 2, Eric 3.
Okay, so there we go. Barney, number 5. Gary Anderson, number 4. Eric Bristow, then Michael Van Gerwen, and the number 1 spot, Phil the Power Taylor. I'll leave you with one question, gents. Is there anybody playing now who you think has the potential to force their way in to that top 5? Wayne?
No. Do you know what? I've got a bit of a problem here as well. I know the darting world is so competitive, but I think that's also can be to the detriment of players. They can become beaten quicker. The careers are not lasting as long. Look, I don't think we're ever going to see a Phil Taylor, Barney, or a Steve Beaton again, or maybe a Martin Adams again. To be good from like the 80s to now is absolutely ludicrous. can you see the likes of, I'm just saying, Michael Van Gerwen, who's, by the way, is somewhat of a stalwart now. He's been around for decades, even though he's only, 31 now, I think. Look, I think it's going to become just more and more difficult for these guys to be so good for so long, which is going to make it harder for them to be classed as absolute darting geniuses and be in the top 5. So no, I don't think there is anyone. But what I want to say is that how lucky are we that we actually remember all these guys playing? We've seen these. I've watched every single one of them live, and I've been in awe of what they can do on a dartboard. And I've seen them like we all have, Dan, around like the back alleys of a Sheffield ice rink and stuff. You watch them just walking with their coat on, and they've got their bobble hats on, and they look like normal human beings. Then a couple of hours later, they're just about to walk on. There's thousands around them, and they're like these superstars. They've changed, haven't they? Like Peter Wright. You see him on a normal tour event, and it's like, this man, look at him, look. Yeah, he's the world champ. Is he? Yeah, watch him Thursday. Then he looks like the world champ. And I just feel really privileged to have been up close and see these guys. And to actually comment on what they've achieved is good, because I think we can forget sometimes just how great even numbers 10, 11, 12 are. They're amazing human beings.
Rod.
I think Wayne's made a good point there. It's so hard now to keep winning, and as we've said, even Michael struggles to keep winning and keep winning big tournaments. It's just very, very hard, and so players do sort of go up the rankings and then fizzle down again. They burst into the top 4, 6, 8, and then disappear out very, very quickly. It's difficult to hold on to those positions. I think a guy who could have been, but maybe his chance to be in that conversation has gone, would have been James Wade if he'd won a couple of world championships. And maybe, with the wind game against Adrian Lewis, if Wade had won that game and he missed that dart, a double 18 to win it, and he'd gone on to beat Andy Hamilton, who knows, he might have been in the conversation with all his match play titles and big TV major titles as well. And I think if we'd been holding the conversation a couple of years ago when Rob Cross played so brilliantly and annihilated Phil Taylor in that final, we'd been saying, well, can Rob go on and win more tournaments? But, things haven't worked out like that, and he's found consistency. He's found it tough to keep his throw-in action, really, and carry on winning tournaments. So he could come back into a conversation in 10 years' time if he can recapture what he was doing in 2018. But beyond that, I think Wayne's right. It's very difficult to see guys in amongst that. Peter Wright hasn't probably got long enough left to win multiple world titles, great as it was, and heartwarming as it was to see him win last year. But I think you'd be struggling to look down the list, Dan, and see someone there that you think, well, he could win 3 or 4 world titles. It's difficult, isn't it?
I'm not so sure. I think the strength in depth right now in darts is as good as it's ever been. And even players who are relatively new to the scene, somebody like, and I'm not saying he's going to burst into the top 5 of all time right now, but if Gerwen Price continues to improve every year, as he has been doing, he could have a significant impact on this game and be in the discussion for things like this in 10 years' time, theoretically. Could he not, Stuart?
Yeah, I think so. And I think he ticks all the boxes as well, doesn't he? With his talent, with his ability, with his brashness. For me, there's a bit of Taylor in there. There's a bit of Bristow in there. There's a bit of Van Gerwen in there. It's a mixed bag. So absolutely, in 10 years' time, there's a chance. I'll just throw one other name in, who hasn't achieved anything in terms of big major titles yet.
Thanks, Stuart. Thank you.
Who could yet still play a part and be mentioned about in years to come, and that's Michael Smith. And everyone knows what the ability he has. I take you back to 2012 and the World Grand Prix at the City West of Dublin, when Mervyn King was all over Michael Van Gerwen, and then all of a sudden the switch was flicked, and Van Gerwen produced some stunning darts. He won the title. And then all of a sudden he became a different player. And I just wonder whether once Michael Smith gets one under his belt, whether he can go on and win multiple titles and win world titles. It's all hypothetical. But, as it stands now, as we're talking now, probably we'd all agree that we all hope that there are several players who could force their way into the conversation. But I think if we're all being honest, we'd say no.
Well, there we go. We have our 5 eventually, and after some wrangling between these 3. Raymond van Barneveld at number 5, the Flying Scotsman Gary Anderson at number 4, Eric Bristow, the legendary Eric Bristow at number 3, Michael van Gerwen at number 2, and Phil the Power Taylor at number 1. Thank you very much to our panellists for thrashing this out. And all this discussion, all these incredible players, nobody has mentioned Bob Anderson or his horse. That's the only letdown in this whole thing. Thank you very much for watching. We'll no doubt have some other pointless debate in the future.